Hello, this is Ron McCulloch, consultant podiatric surgeon specializing in the condition of Morton's neuroma. Now, the majority of neuromas that we see are between the second and third and the third and fourth toes, by far. But occasionally we get patients in who will have neuromas in the forefoot elsewhere. And sometimes they're told that that just doesn't happen and therefore they must have a different condition, and obviously they can become confused about that. So this video is just a brief video to discuss the incidence of neuromas, not between the second and third or the third and fourth toes, but rather between the fourth and fifth and the first and second. So neuromas between the first and second toes do occur. They are relatively rare and they make up a very small percentage of all the neuromas that we see. Now, the reason why they can form is because, just like with all of the other neuromas that can form, there is a nerve between the first and second toes that, if it gets excessive friction and pressure, can become thickened and can become a Morton's neuroma. Now, the usual reason why this happens is if there is excessive compression in that area for some kind of anatomical reason. So one reason can be if you have a very large great toe joint which has become arthritic and therefore much bulkier than it would normally be, then the space between the first and second toe and the space between the first and second metatarsal is diminished, and that can give rise to irritation of the nerve as symptoms. Occasionally, because of the mechanics of the foot, you can get a lot of friction and a lot of burning in the area that can give rise to irritation on the nerve, and as a consequence it will become thickened and a neuroma will form. Generally, there's a biomechanical reason for it. I've also seen it in situations where there's been a very large sesamoid which appears to place some additional pressure between the first and second toes. A sesamoid is a small bone that forms underneath the great toe joint. Everybody has sesamoid bones, but they can become abnormal, and that can then give rise to the issue. So the way that a 1-2 Morton's neuroma, or in this case really it's an interdigital neuroma because Morton really only described it between the third and fourth toes, but the way that a interdigital neuroma between the first and second toes is diagnosed is exactly the same as with other neuromas. Ultrasound is by far the best investigative modality, and if the nerve is clearly thickened and it's not simply a bursitis, and there are ways of doing the scan that can determine that, then we know that there is a neuroma and it can be treated in the same way. A caveat to that is that cryosurgery becomes particularly valuable in treating Morton's neuroma between the first and second toes because the nerve is larger. And whilst you may not be that aware of numbness if you have a surgical procedure between, say, the third and fourth toes, which of course you'd have if you have the nerve removed or destroyed, when you have the nerve removed or destroyed between the first and second toes, you're more likely to be aware of that numbness because obviously the great toe is much larger and you're much more aware of sensitivity around that area. So that's a particular reason why we would always do cryosurgery, which we in most cases do anyway, but certainly in that situation I'd be very cautious about a destructive procedure like radiofrequency or an open procedure to remove the nerve. So a similar situation can occur between the fourth and fifth toes. Again, the nerve can become thickened, but again it's rarer. And by the way, the reason why it's so much rarer is because the spacing between the fourth and fifth toes, just like between the first and second toes, is much larger, and therefore the chances of the nerve becoming compressed in that area are smaller. Nevertheless, we do see neuromas, interdigital neuromas between the fourth and fifth toes. Again, we might see it in situations where there is pathology and enlargement of the joint, or also sometimes when there are specific mechanical features that place a lot of pressure in the area. In some cases, that space between the toes isn't as great as it should be, and that in itself can be a risk factor. Now, between the fourth and fifth toes, the treatments are very similar again to what we would normally advise. The implications of permanent numbness between the fourth and fifth toes are certainly not as great as they would be between the first and second toes. So I hope this overview is useful. They are rare in this area, but if you do have one, you're not mistaken. If you have all the classic features, it's not an impossibility, I should say. It is quite possible that you'll have a Morton's neuroma, and if you do have the condition, then of course we would manage and treat it in an appropriate way here in our centre.